Hello, this is Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. On today's show, it is time for starts, sits, and sleepers for week 9 of the fantasy football season. I'm going to be joined again by Evan Webb, contributing writer here at RealTime Fantasy Sports. Evan, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
Kind of a tough week, Evan. 6 teams on a bye. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's very rare to have six teams on a bye, so um, this is probably a very important show actually, just because it's going to be to see some of these guys on who to start, who to sit, maybe some sleepers that you could start over some of these guys that are guys you normally play on, that are on bye this week. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what we got.
Yeah, exactly. I know I have some tough decisions at running back, one of my leagues. It's really
Yeah.
ugly with so many guys on a bye. So it's going to be a tough one, I think, for some people. Might be some low scoring games compared to last week, which was crazy high scoring. And we even had the Chiefs and Chargers off, and it was still a high scoring week. So
Right.
interesting to see how it plays out this week. All right, let's jump into this. Let's look at the quarterback position first. Who do you have as a start at QB?
Yeah, I feel like it's a guy I mention like every week. It feels like, but Marcus Mariota. I mean, 253 yards passing last week, three passing touchdowns, 43 rushing yards. He's really put up great numbers consistently throughout the year, actually. And I mean, I don't understand why he's not being started in more leagues. I think right now he's only being started at around 27% of our leagues. I mean, I personally think he's a better start than like a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers right now. So I'm actually kind of surprised he's not being started a little bit more. But especially this week with a lot of guys on bye, I mean, I think it's a great week to start Marcus Mariota, and he's playing a Chargers team that especially hasn't been good against quarterbacks that can rush, and I think that's a big key going into this game. The Chargers got tore up by Geno Smith 2 weeks ago. So I think this is a good matchup for Mariota, and yeah, so that's why I like Mariota this week.
Yeah, you got to love his floor because of his rushing ability. Definitely helps his fantasy value. I got another guy who's kind of similar, who can run the balls. Justin Fields. He's actually throwing the ball better as well lately, also. But I really like him this week. He's fifth overall in fantasy quarterback scoring his last 3 games. He has at least 21 fantasy points each of those games. Played great against a good Cowboys defense last week. I know they were down big, but he brought him way back. Scored 3 touchdowns. Ran for 60 yards. I think he'll do really well again this week against Miami. Seventh most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks on the season, 28th overall against the pass. So I think I'll just roll with Fields. I think he's a top 10 QB in this matchup. Looking for big things from him once again. All right, on the flip side of things, Evan, how about a sit at QB?
Yeah, I just mentioned his name, but Tom Brady. I was looking it up, and he's still being started in like over 67% of the leagues, which is just insane to me. I feel like you can't look at the name on the back of the jersey. You got to start looking at what you see with your eyes right now, and he's just not getting it done, especially from a fantasy standpoint. Really, for the team overall. I mean, 26 of 44 for 325 yards last week isn't terrible, but it's just still not the Tom Brady. You can tell he's a little bit uncomfortable with what's going on there right now. And another note to mention, I mean, he's only had 9 touchdowns in 8 starts this year. So, I mean, that alone suggests that, you probably should stay away from him until he can prove it on a week to week basis. So, I I personally, I'm way higher on a guy like Mariota or like what you mentioned, Justin Fields over a guy like Tom Brady.
Yeah, Tom Brady's red zone struggles is the issue. He's thrown for a lot of yards still, man. He can't find the end
Yeah.
zone. That's not helping fantasy teams at all. I have a veteran quarterback as well that I'm sitting at, and again, like you said, can't look at the name on the jersey. You got to go with the production at this point. Matthew Stafford, he's been really one of the biggest busts in my opinion of all fantasy quarterbacks. He's top 20 fantasy points just once all year. He failed to throw for 200 passing yards last week for the first time all season. They're banged up at receiver. Cooper Kupp's banged up. Tyler Higbee got banged up in that game as well. Both those guys are probably going to play, but still, I worry about him, especially against Tampa. You just mentioned Tom Brady and Tampa Bay, but this defense is still pretty good. They're sixth overall against the pass, allow just 194 passing yards per game. So I think Stafford's a really iffy play once again in week 9. Okay, how about a sleeper quarterback, Evan? Who do you got?
Yeah, I got a veteran quarterback. I got Andy Dalton from the New Orleans Saints. Has actually put up decent numbers the last 2 weeks, and last week a very workmanlike 22 of 30, 229 passing yards for 2 touchdowns. He does have weapons there in New Orleans to go to, and they're playing a Ravens team which secondary hasn't been that great. So I think it's a good matchup for him. And I think it's a game that there's actually going to be a lot of points scored between those two teams on a Monday night, especially. So I like the matchup against the Ravens, and if you have a quarterback that's out this week, he's a good sleeper pick to put in a quarterback for this one.
Yeah, definitely. My sleeper's Taylor Heineke with the Washington Commanders. He's looked pretty good since getting a chance to start for them. He has multiple scores each of his first 2 games. He topped 25 fantasy points last week against a pretty good Colts defense, in my opinion. Threw for 279 yards and a score. Also ran for a score on 29 rushing yards. He can make some plays with his legs as well, so that helps his fantasy floor. And he gets the Vikings this week. They're just 29th against the pass compared to 8th against the run. So I think Heineke could be a good play. Like you said, a lot of teams on a bye are looking for some streamers. I think Heineke could do well for fantasy teams in week 9. Let's move on to that running back spot now. Evan, who's your start at running back for week 9?
Yeah, I got Jamal Williams from the Detroit Lions. I think he's a good start this week, especially because DeAndre Swift is still questionable. And last week, Williams put up 10 rushes for 53 yards and had 2 touchdowns. So he's getting good production overall, and he's even getting some receptions to go along with that rushing production. Has a high floor, I think, and he's still only being started around 60% of the league. So if I think he's a good, at least at the minimum, a flex position, if not your second running back going into this week, especially with Swift out. And they're facing kind of a struggling Green Bay team. I know Green Bay is not too bad defensively, but I like the matchup this week for Jamal Williams.
Yeah, he could just get a lot of volume as a runner and receiver because they're missing so many options in that passing game. So I definitely like his floor as well. My start for this week is Miles Sanders with the Philadelphia Eagles. He had just 9 carries last week. Still ran for 78 yards and a score, though. He has at least 70 rushing yards, 3 or 4 games, double-digit fantasy points, all but 2 games this year. He's been really consistent. Gets a Houston team that's really bad against the run. They allow 186 rushing yards per game. They allow the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So I think they get up big, run the clock out, win this game big, and I think Sanders has a big showing for all of his fantasy owners in week 9. Okay, how about a sit at running back now, Evan?
They got Devin Singletary from the Buffalo Bills. For one, the Bills just added Naheem Hines from they got him in a trade with the Colts, and I think Singletary's usage is going to go down a little bit. Now, the Buffalo Bills did get rid of Zach Moss in that this trade deadline too, but I think Hines will be used a lot more than what Zach Moss was. So I do think Singletary's usage is going to go down, and they're going up against the Jets defense, which has actually been pretty good against the rush for the most part. Singletary might still be a decent flex, player this week, but I still would lean to sit him.
Okay, my sit, I'm just gonna lay a blanket one out there. It's any Chiefs running back. I just don't want to mess with any of them. Isaiah Pacheco was named the starter last week. Everybody got excited. He ran 8 times for 43 yards, didn't catch a pass, and he was outproduced by the backup. Clyde Edwards-Helaire scored 9.2 fantasy points, but still, Edwards-Helaire scored a touchdown, still didn't top double-digit fantasy points. I just don't think you can trust this situation at this point, especially this week against the Titans. They're second against the run compared to 24th against the pass. I would just not mess with these guys at this point. I don't think they're worth the hassle. Edwards-Helaire is a touchdown-dependent player, doesn't get many yards, catches. Pacheco just hasn't done much to date. I'm just let somebody else deal with it. I don't want any of these guys in my lineup at this point. All right, let's move on to sleeper now. Evan, who's your sleeper running back?
I got Dontrell Hilliard from the Tennessee Titans. Henry is going to play this week, but he is still dealing with a little bit of a sore foot, and I think Hilliard could be a good flex option this week, going up against a pretty mediocre Chiefs defense for the most part. 8 rushes for 83 yards last week, and he's getting great chunk yardage. He's breaking off runs for about 10 yards at a time. So he does get those good chunk yards for good runs. So I like Hilliard at least for this week with kind of a banged up Derrick Henry. Henry is going to play, but he is still kind of dealing with a sore foot. So I like Hilliard as a possible sleeper and maybe a flex start this week.
Yeah, I really worry about Henry's workload. I mean, they are just
Yeah.
running him to the ground. It's week 9 now, but man, he has a lot of carries. I think it would make sense to get Hilliard more involved, and they can't throw the ball. So I kind of like this call on Hilliard this week. He can end up getting, 6 to 8 carries, a couple catches as well. So interesting to see how that plays out. My sleeper is Caleb Huntley with the Atlanta Falcons. He's pretty much splitting the carries with Tyler Algier right now, but he's playing better. 16 carries for 91 yards last week. He's not going to catch passes, but they run the ball a lot. And the Chargers are not very good against the run. They allow the second most fantasy points of running backs, 28th, 27th overall against the run, allowing 137.6 rushing yards per game. So I like Huntley a lot. Even if Cordarrelle Patterson plays, which is possible, could return this week from his knee injury, I still think Huntley's going to get his chances and get double-digit touches in week 9. So I think he could be a good flex play or maybe even a low-end number 2 back, considering so many people are on a bye this week. Okay, let's move on to receiver now. Evan, who's your start at receiver in week 9?
I'm going to go with Romeo Doubs from the Green Bay Packers. He's really gotten off to a slow start most of the season, but he did actually have a good game against the Buffalo Bills last week. Ended up scoring a touchdown and a tough catch in the back of the end zone. But he is getting a little more usage. And now Lazard was out last week, and he's questionable going into this one. So that's kind of why I like Dobbs going up against really bad Lions defense. So I like Dobbs this week. I mean, I debated this one for a while, thinking about it, but because overall this season he hasn't really put up the numbers. But I think Green Bay is actually gonna have a good game against the Lions this week, and I think he's going to be heavily involved.
My start this week is Juju Smith-Schuster with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's really, found his footing in this passing game. 2 straight 100-yard games, scores each of those games. He's top 20 fantasy points each of those games as well. I think he's almost in must-start territory. He's become the go-to option outside of Travis Kelce, getting a lot of looks, weekly looks. And Tennessee allows the 6th most fantasy points for receivers and 254.7 passing yards per game. Like I said, they're good against the run, not good against the they're good against the run, but not good against the pass. So I think Juju Smith-Schuster in the Kansas City passing attack does really well in this matchup. Okay, how about a sit at receiver for you, Evan?
Yeah, so mine's kind of obvious now just because Ian Rappaport actually just put out that he's going to likely not play this week, but it's Braden Cooks from the Houston Texans. He is not happy with the situation there in Houston, and it looks like he's going to sit out. I don't know if it's just going to be for this week or the weeks going forward, but he's definitely not happy. But I do have another one for you, just because Cooks is likely not going to play at this point, and it's Jacoby Myers from the New England Patriots. He's facing off against the Indianapolis Colts, who have been a great secondary most of this season and have great pass coverage. And Myers did put up good numbers last week, but I think it's a really tough matchup against Indy. So I kind of like him as a sit, especially if you have some other, decent second or third wide receivers on your team.
Yeah, Cook's situation's a strange one. Obviously not happy because he wasn't traded. So who knows what's going to happen there going forward. Kind of a shame because he's been a good player in recent years. So kind of unfortunate. My sit is Paris Campbell, who actually has been making a lot of my lists lately. He looked great in week 6 and 7. He had double-digit targets, 18-plus fantasy points each of those games. But Sam Ellinger got started, inserted in the starting lineup last week. He had just 2 targets in this game. So he went from 23 targets his previous 2 games to 2. So I don't like the fact that Ellinger doesn't really take a lot of shots down the field. He also plays the Patriots this week. Campbell does. They allow the second fewest fantasy points to receivers. So I'm staying away from Campbell at this point until he starts doing more on the field, and I can trust Ellinger as a starter in Indianapolis. So I'm going to avoid him for now. I've still got my eye on him, but a little concerned about last week and how that played out. All right, how about a sleeper at that receiver position now, Evan?
Yeah, I got a Baltimore Raven, and that's Demarcus Robinson. 6 for 8 last week for 64 yards. No Rashad Bateman. He's going to be out this week. So I think Demarcus Robinson's going to get involved a little bit. And Not they're playing not a very good Saints secondary either, so I think that's more of a reason to maybe think about adding Demarcus Robinson as a potential flex or even just have on your bench this week.
Yeah, you got to dig deep in these weeks when you got 6 teams on a bye. And I like the Robinson call. You could get more looks in week 9. My sleeper is Zay Jones with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been kind of erratic this year, but he's shown flashes of big games. He had 1 game with double-digit catches, 3 games with double-digit fantasy points, and he's getting the chances. He's played the most snaps out of any Jags receiver the last 3 games. He's played at least 98% of the snaps those 3 games. So I like him from a volume perspective, especially this week against Las Vegas. 25th against the pass. They allow 258.1 passing yards per game. They were brutal last week against the Saints. So I think Jones has a good showing in this matchup. All right, let's move on to tight end now. Evan, who's your start at tight end? We get Travis Kelce back, which is good news. Mark Andrews might not be in the lineup, though. So who do you got as a start?
Yeah, for once this year, I actually have something positive to say about Kyle Pitts. It's taken a while, and it took him a while to finally get into the end zone, but he finally did get his first receiving touchdown of the year, and his usage has kind of gone up a little bit the last 2 weeks. So last week, 5 of 9 for 80 yards, and again, finally had that touchdown. And I think going forward, I think he's a good start, and Atlanta's still in the race too. So I mean, Mariota's throwing the ball decent. I like Pitts going forward. I mean, especially because of tight ends. There's not much out there. So I do like Pitts going forward.
Yep. I hope you're right because I have some stock in Pitts and be anxious to see how he does this week after his big game last week. My start is Zach Ertz with the Arizona Cardinals. He scored his 3rd touchdown of the season last week. He actually has double-digit fantasy points all but 1 game. So he's been one of the few consistent fantasy tight ends this year. He gets the Seahawks. They allow the most fantasy points to tight ends for the season. So I think Ertz is probably a top 5 fantasy play this week, and I think he'll do really well in this matchup. Okay, let's look at a sit at tight end. Who do you got?
I got Tyler Higbee from the Los Angeles Rams. 6 targets last week, and only 2 of those receptions for 15 yards. He actually had a couple drops and had a huge drop that would have been for a touchdown. So he has actually kind of been dealing. He had 3 drops in the last game. So I don't know what's really going on there with Higbee, but he's also dealing with a bit of a neck issue as well. And also they're going to be playing a pretty good to decent Tampa Bay defense this week. So I like Higbee as a sit.
My sit is Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. He's actually been playing better lately. He had 3 catches for 38 yards and a touchdown last week, but still, he's top 40 yards just once all year. He has 2 games with fewer than 2 fantasy points, so he's really erratic. I don't think it's a guy you just feel confident playing on a weekly basis unless it's a great matchup. I don't think it's a good matchup this week against Chicago. They allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. They do really well in covering the tight end. I know they just traded Roquan Smith, so they're down a linebacker, but still, I think they can stop Gesicki in this matchup. And if you have better options, I'd consider using them this week. Okay, how about a sleeper at tight end?
Yeah, I got Isaiah Likely from the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews is still questionable and still a little bit banged up. 6 of 7 last week for Likely for 77 yards, and he did have a touchdown in that start, filling in for Mark Andrews. So I think this week, at least for one more week, I like Isaiah Likely as a sleeper pick. Maybe you put him in a tight end if you have a couple bad ones, just for at least this week in particular. So yeah, I think for at least one more week, Isaiah Likely's a good pick.
Yeah, even if Andrews ends up playing, he could end up getting a lot of playing time because of all their
Right.
injuries at receiver. My sleeper is a little deep sleeper here. It's Kylan Granson with the Indianapolis Colts. He actually had a season high in snaps last week. 55% of the snaps he played outsnapped Mo Alley Cox, who is the starter. Sam Ellinger, like I mentioned earlier, does not like to push the ball down the field. I think that's good news for the tight end and somebody like Granson, who's not really a deep threat. I think he could get a lot of catches in this game. He had three catches last week. Has multiple catches all but 2 games this year. If you're in deeper formats, I would consider him against the Patriots, who struggle against the tight end. They allow the 7th most fantasy points at tight end. So a little bit of a deep sleeper, but Granson is my pick for this week at tight end. All right, Evan, thanks so much for joining me once again. I really appreciate it. Good luck in all your games this week.
Yeah, good luck to you as well. I will be starting Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week, so
Uh-oh.
because I got Nick Chubb out, so I hope you're actually wrong on the Chiefs running back situation, but I do for the most part agree with you on that, just because it's not great usage for either of them, and yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if Edwards-Helaire can do anything for me this
Yeah.
week.
You got to do what you got to do sometimes,
That's
unfortunately.
right.
So it happens. It's fantasy. All right, Evan, thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate it. All right, this has been Jeff Paur for week 9 of the fantasy football season and the Start, Sits, and Sleeper show. Good luck to all of you in your games this week. Hope you have a lot of success.